Hello, this is Lisa, your host of Unexplained Arkansas, and I'm doing this during the day and it feels off, like I'm normally recording at night. But I'm not today. So anyway, this is episode number 71. This is the second part to Tony Alamo episode. He is the cult leader in Arkansas. So if you haven't listened to part one, go back, listen to part one. So this will not make sense. But this is part two, and just a little business. So we're super excited. I don't know how many days out from our live show here in Searcy, February 8th. We are about a third full, so we still have plenty of room. It's a good space. It's at the Rialto Theater. If you want to confirm, reserve a seat, you need to message or email me. And my email is unexplainedarkansas@gmail.com. Or you can message me on Instagram, Facebook. Also join all that. I will say, if you're a current Patreon member and you come to the live show, you will have special seating. So just FYI, if you have tickets and you want special seating, sign up for Patreon. So just kind of a few things there. But we are super excited. We are covering the White County Courthouse, like the history and the haunted stories. And then Amber's going to cover some White County folklore, just some fun stuff. And it's going to be really interesting, and we will have some tidbits about the Rialto itself. So the show's going to be fun. We're going to record it, and the show will air as an episode. So just FYI on that too. But we're super excited. Live show, yes. So reach out to me for any content questions, live show questions, just show up, whatever. So yay. And please share. And also, if you are on YouTube, go in and subscribe. Like, we are getting really close to a goal marker there. And so I'm going to have a push for that. So subscribe on YouTube, please. So now we're going to get to part two. And I will have a little disclaimer in this episode. Like, part one really didn't get into Tony's issues as much as part two will. So just kind of a little listener discretion. I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting into specifics or anything, but there is some, child abuse. There is some sexual abuse. So just FYI in this episode. And again, it's going to be glazed over. I'm just not going to go that far in depth into it. And anyway, so just, yeah. So that's up to you guys. So where we left off, Tony's wife, Susan, who had really been the actual leader of the so-called foundation, aka cult, she has just died. And in the last part, we talked about how he did not bury her. So he did not have her buried. It is a year later, and she is still not buried because he has told his followers that they need to do a 24/7 prayer vigil, and that she's going to come back. She's going to be raised from the dead. So she is literally in her coffin, open coffin, inside Tony's house, Tony and Susan's house. So yes, finally, one of the members comes to Tony and told him Susan was literally starting to rot. She's literally like her flesh is rotting. So they do get started and they build a mausoleum for her on the property. And again, go to part one to find out where this property is, all those details. So they do finally put her in the mausoleum. Like, she's finally, quote unquote, buried. Okay. So at least she's out of the house. She is in the mausoleum now. So in an interview, one of the children who grew up in the house, now they're fully grown, and her name is Rebecca. And she states that before Susan had died, that she had told Tony, like, evidently Rebecca's dad was very big in the foundation, and he was there, and he stated that he heard Susan tell Tony to let these people go, like, let the followers go, because, quote unquote, she said that he would ruin this place. And of course, Tony, I mean, he doesn't care. He was not about to give up any power. He was not about to give up any money. And he was essentially about to amp up the crazy. It's already been crazy enough with the followers, but he's full blown on his own without any of Susan at least keeping him a little bit in check. So at this point, the Department of Labor already had a case against Tony active. So 3 weeks after Susan passed away, the case actually went to trial. And the members were told that Tony was fighting the government because they were evil. So this is what Tony's propaganda is about this case. They don't know the truth about the fact that the Department of Labor, and maybe they do know the truth and just don't care, but that the Department of Labor is concerned because he's not paying these people. They're essentially just getting zero money and turning it all over to the foundation. So, but Tony's word is, like as a prophet to them. So the followers, when interviewed about the wage issues, they just state that they work for the church and they don't need income because the church takes care of all their needs. So Tony would call the IRS a Gestapo. He would just rant and rave that the IRS was trying to destroy his freedom of religion. And in the U.S. District Court, they did rule that the foundation owed $19 million in back wages and overtime. So Tony, of course, appeals this decision. And in addition to the Labor Department, so now the IRS is becoming serious about their investigation. They've been watching this situation. I mean, he's been on people's radar. The IRS is aware of how lavishly they are living. The Alamos are living. They literally had purchased, like documented purchases of gold coins, silver bars, statues, antiques, fur coats, Cadillacs, tons of travel, and they've documented all these purchases on the foundation. So the foundation is purchasing these items. And this foundation is supposed to be a religious organization. So there you go. Alamo did tell reporters during the time that the foundation was worth $50 million. Chris, which was Susan's daughter, stated that her mom, she only made Tony a very rich psychopath. So, because her mom is really the one that was instrumental in building the following. Tony now, he is the business person. He was definitely building the business side, but he would not have had any of this without Susan. So with Susan gone, Tony he's amped up. He's probably grief stricken. He's acting irrationally. He would literally now just yell from the pulpit. His sermons just became extremely hate-filled. Susan was really the one that had the sermons, and kind of Tony was more in the background, or maybe doing some preaching, not very much, and he would, be a part of maybe the musical worship. But now he is on his own, and he is just yelling at everybody, and it's just very apocalyptic. It's very hateful. So it's not great. So when some of the members when Tony saw that the members would take it and they weren't leaving him, he just got worse. And then also the beatings ramped up on the children. So the children were already kind of getting beaten, kind of the whole, I don't know, in part one, we kind of get into that, but now it's ramped up. It's even more going on as far as beating the children. And he just, that was just a bad deal. So Tony would dictate, so he was responsible for every single decision made, and he would dictate the number of swats, that were supposed to be dealt out to anyone for any type of, crime or sin, so-called, that they would turn over. And he would dictate this if he wasn't on the compound. And he, of course, they have multiple locations going on. They have Arkansas. They have the property in California. They have other properties and churches kind of across the nation, which we talked about. So he is dictating everything from the speakerphone. Like nothing is going on without him. So he was the deciding person. So he would have some of his largest men members actually do the beatings. And of course, he would threaten them with beatings if they didn't do it, so they're doing it. And kind of Tony would require them to do it by telling the men again that he's going to beat them, he's going to beat their families, he's going to, they're basically under his control, and it's all about the fear and control and being in charge. So in 1984, Tony was actually spending a lot of time away from the compound. I mean, he's still ruling over everyone via the phone. Sue's been gone. Sue's been gone for 2 years. And he was actually hanging out with a woman in Beverly Hills that owned a fashion business. She owned a shop, and her name was Birgitta Gillenhammer. In an interview with her, she had an interview in a little documentary section. So she states that he spent a lot of money in her store. Like, he took her to dinner, he gave her diamonds, and kind of after a very short time of knowing her, he asked her to marry him. And she really felt like she was chosen because she looked somewhat like Susan. Like, she had kind of the hair, she was similar age, like that was kind of his, and she even said this, that was his draw to her. But and something that was just interesting that she said that, like, he wouldn't physically touch her, like he wouldn't touch her, kiss her, or anything because they weren't married yet. That's what he had told her. So he was kind of really driving in the ministry such, of course he's hate-filled and awful and requiring people to be beaten, but she doesn't know all this. So I guess he's just he's playing her up for sure. So Tony goes back and tells the members that God sent him a new wife. And Birgitta wasn't even a Christian. Like, she was kind of, she wasn't a U.S. citizen. She was an immigrant. She was not involved in a church. She wasn't involved in any type of religion. But Tony did tell her he wanted her in church and he wanted her to get baptized. And so she did go along with what Tony wanted. And then kind of as they're moving forward and as she's interviewed, she says as long as she was willing and did provide him with sex 3 times a day, that he was nice to her. Otherwise, he would beat her. He would choke her. He would get angry with her and just say that she was a terrible, wife, say that she was this and that. He was verbally abusive, physically abusive to her, if he did not get what he wanted sexually from her. So in this same period, Tony, and he is a good businessman, he did come up with the idea and design of his infamous Tony Alamo designer jackets that did become extremely popular, extremely mainstream. I think the only reason I even kind of know his name is probably because of those jackets. Like, I didn't know anything about him, anything about this cult. Just whenever, in fact, shout out to Taylor, shouted her out in part 1, because she actually told me about Tony Alamo, because I had no clue about all this, but before I researched. And yeah, so he has these designer jackets, and they are, this is the 80s. They are jean jackets. They are covered in rhinestones, sequins, airbrushing. They were quite fabulous, I would say, for the 80s. And they were unique, and they were definitely interesting. And he basically made his members fulfill these orders, and they were literally making them by hand, putting on these rhinestones, putting on these sequins by hand. There was essentially a sweatshop built on the property there in Arkansas for the production of the jackets. And the children would have to work in the business, the jacket business as well. And especially with their tiny hands and the rhinestones, they were very helpful in the production. And yeah, so it was just, this is how and these jackets are selling a lot in the 80s. So Birgitta did have connections in New York City because she had been in the fashion industry. She had her own shop. And so she had a lot of connections. She was the one that introduced him to some New York, buyers or whatever. And his jackets became big. They became very big. And and he had the kids doing the work and the members doing the work. And the members, later on, they said they never got paid, of course, for the labor. They never even got a jacket of their own. They never got recognition for making the jackets, like zero. And the jackets really are, I would say, quote unquote, works of art. They really are. I mean, if you, I will be posting pictures and such, so I will be posting the jackets. But yeah, and it stated that the sale on the jackets would hit $1 million in a matter of days. I mean, they were very popular. They were, it was very popular. So they were in the mainstream stores, these Tony Alamo jackets, mainstream stores. And then they also had personalized jackets made specifically for celebrities. Like Dolly Parton had one, Mike Tyson, Brooke Shields, Sonny Bono, Mr. T. All of these people could be seen out and about wearing these Tony Alamo jackets specifically made for them. I think even Michael Jackson had one. So this was a huge deal. And again, it's the 80s or whatever. I think each jacket, I mean, we're talking in the 80s, just the regular ones, not even talking about the celebrity ones, but I think they were going for $300 or something a piece, if not more. So it was a big to-do, quote unquote. So the Labor Department at this point is starting to hear rumors of child labor going on, but they couldn't really prove. So they're hearing stuff, but the problem is they can't prove anything. They just don't have proof. In 1985, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the verdict about the $19 million against the foundation. Remember, they've been going back and forth with the Labor Department, Tony has. So Tony was now required to pay his workers. Yes, and he had, I guess, 4 months to get this done. And so the IRS revoked the foundation's tax exempt status as well. So now Tony, because the IRS at this point hadn't been making them pay taxes, but now is, so that they owe the foundation owes the IRS $7.9 million. So they owe $19 million in back wages and $7.9 million to the IRS in tax. So of course, Tony, this doesn't really stop him. He keeps on going. He just keeps on doing what he's doing, just whatever. So Brigida kind of knew all along that, and Tony kind of told her that every single thing that he had was not in his name. Like it was either in the foundation's name. I mean, he was just basically utilizing items of the foundation. So he told her that if she left him and divorced him, that she would have nothing because he has nothing. And I will say a lot of the foundation's so-called items are also being hidden under followers' names. So that was happening a lot. So just a lot of assets are being hidden, but nothing was being put in Tony's name. And this sounds very familiar. I don't know if anyone has watched the NXIVM, the cult NXIVM's documentaries. I think they're on HBO, but that is definitely what that leader was doing, is just basically be like, nothing's in my name. So that's kind of how they roll. Kind of additionally, Tony told her, because she did say that she loved him. Like in the documentary, she said that she loved him, but he did turn into a devil once he got her married. Of course, he kind of, wooed her pretty good to begin with. But he did, he would continually hurt her, and he did tell her if she left him, the Lord would have her killed. So, of course, he's using the Lord in all of his hate-filled everything that he does, and that, as a Christian, that just, anyway, that's just so terrible to hear people doing these things. So, additionally, Tony kind of fully... Again, he's doing whatever he wishes now that Sue's gone. So he did begin, and I think we kind of talked about this, he started to really focus on his preaching about the ability to take multiple wives. So he's putting this in his followers' ear, and this is kind of the direction that he's going in. And we kind of talked about this because he had stated that girls, as long as they had entered puberty, were basically women, and they could basically get married. So he's going down this road. He's headed in this direction. So he did begin looking at young girls to take on as his multiple wives. And I will say in 1986, Birgitta finally does file for divorce. And she leaves. She was fearful. She was afraid, but she finally had enough. She gets out of there. And he does have her followed for many years just to kind of scare her. He never does anything to her per se, but he does threaten her for many years after this. So Tony's pretty much feeling invincible. He would call himself the Teflon Pastor. I guess kind of like Don Gotti was the Teflon Don. He kind of takes on this Teflon Pastor reference. So even with his legal issues, he kind of continues on with his normal activities, his normal businesses. He does expand into the Miami, Florida area. And while in Miami, he does have a couple of his kind of higher up followers go down to Miami to kind of work on this. And one of their names is Kerry Miller. So Kerry Miller, he's kind of in Miami. He's doing some work for the foundation for Tony. And he kind of comes across this young man that needs someone. So he starts to feed him. He starts to take care of him. His name's Justin. And so Kerry decides, and Kerry and his wife Carol do not have any children in the foundation or anything. So he decides to adopt Justin. So Justin is now with him, and he is, going back from Florida to the foundation where Kerry normally lives, which at this point was in the compound in Arkansas. So, and again, Kerry, even though he's been in the foundation, he's not had children. So he's really not been privy to all of the terrible things that have happened to children. Now, Kerry also, in 1987, Kerry and his brother Bob started a trucking company, and they were making a lot of money for Tony. So they had this trucking company that was really their thing, but it was kind of like all these other things the members would do. They would make their money and then give everything to the foundation. And of course, Tony's like taking it all. So, and again, Kerry had no clue about what was going on with the children because he hadn't had children. I think Bob had, but he himself was still, like Kerry's brother Bob, was still kind of in the dark about it. So, anywho, once he has Justin now he's becoming aware, and he's, and he would find out what's going on with the kids, and he and his brother are like, we got to get out of here. So not only are they, I think they're finding out about the beating of the children, so they want to protect their children, and they're also have this business, and they're kind of tired of just working and not getting anywhere. So Bob and Kerry decide to sneak out. They decide to leave. They get shot at. They kind of go away. They tried to get, their wives to leave, and their wives would not leave. So Carol is staying, and then she alerts people. So in an effort to kind of keep Justin with her, she alerts the others. So that's why they get shot at. So Kerry and Bob are trying to leave, and they're, they just have to run out without their children. So they don't have their children at this point. And Justin didn't even kind of know what was going on. I mean, he didn't realize that his dad was trying to leave and that he was trying to take him. Like, he had no clue. And all Carol is doing is telling Justin that, bad things about Kerry, like he's, terrible, and he's leaving the foundation. So kind of in retribution, because Tony is concerned about this, and anytime anyone tries to leave, there's going to be repercussions on the people left. So he sends Tony sends Carol and Justin to the Saugus property in California, because they still have that property, and that's kind of where he kind of sends people to be kind of on annex. It's kind of like the Arkansas compound is the main one, and then you kind of go into an annex into the California. It's just kind of, I don't know, not a huge amount going on out there. So that's what's happening. So there, Justin would get beatings because Tony's telling, the followers that he still loves and cares for Kerry, and so they have to punish him for this. And so really what Tony's trying to do is punish people, show people, okay, if your loved ones leave, you're going to get beaten. So that's what's going on. So literally in front of everybody, Tony is on the speakerphone. He states to the men to give these beatings, to rotate and give Justin 20 swats apiece and do it as hard as they can. And they do end up beating Justin bloody. I'm not going to get into any more than that. He literally couldn't walk or sit for a terribly long time. And he ended up recanting later that he got hit 150 times. And literally his mother, Carol, is there witnessing this, and she did absolutely nothing. In fact, there are people that are doing it. Then there are people that are holding him down while it's done. And then Carol's sitting there not doing anything, and all the children are just watching in horror as this is happening. Everybody's crying, and they're frozen in fear, of course, because they don't want to be next. So this incident happened. This happened in 1988 by this time. So after 3 months of being gone, Carrie finds out, because he's searching. He wants to break his son out of the situation. He knows what's up now. So he finds out that Justin was taken to California and to the original compound. And so Carrie is able to get a court order because of Justin being taken across state lines. And that was considered kidnapping and child concealment. So Carrie actually goes out with the police and the sheriff's department in California to get his son. And Carol actually tries to hide Justin. And Justin still doesn't know anything about what's happening. He doesn't realize that Carrie tried to take him. He has no clue. He's just being fed the same old propaganda that everybody is fed on, in the foundation. So finally, they get Justin out. The sheriff luckily finds Justin in hiding. He pulls him out. He gets him out. And then literally Carrie in an interview states, Justin was terrified of everybody. He barely would even come to his dad. And then finally, Carrie was like, I'm going to take you away from this. I'm going to take you to Disneyland. And then that kind of, made Justin feel better. So then Justin is warming up to Carrie, and Justin tells Carrie about everything that's happened and about his beating, his horrific beating, and that he was beaten bloody. So Justin tells the name. So, of course, they're talking to the sheriff's department. Justin tells the names of everyone involved and how Tony was the main one on the phone commanding it to be done, and also how his mother and everyone involved either held him down, was there, or beat him. And then, so at that time, they do go into the compound after hearing this, and, I guess social services in California get involved, and they do check every child in the California compound to make sure they do not have any type of broken bones, marks, bruising, and if there were any signs of abuse, at that point they were removed from. And it didn't say if anyone was removed or if any others did. It did not state that. So in 1988, Tony is charged with child abuse of Justin, and this is from the state of California, and he doesn't show up to court. He doesn't show up, and Carrie and the other ex-members, and like Carrie's brother Bob was involved too, because he had children involved that he got out. So they get involved with the media. So now they're telling the media everything that happened. Justin is going on several news shows like Current Affair, and he's sharing his awful story. So they're trying to get the story out. So Carrie and his brother Bob really didn't want to wait on the justice in California. I mean, at this time, it was kind of like they had filed, like the state had kind of filed for the child abuse or whatever, but nothing was too much moving forward, and it kind of went back and forth on that. But they decided to file a civil suit here against Alamo, against Tony and his businesses in Arkansas. So they file the civil suit. So in June 28th, 1989, there was a federal warrant issued charging Tony with unlawful interstate flight because he was trying to avoid prosecution on the child abuse. So they did file that. And then Tony was kind of denying at that time any affiliation with the Alamo Ministries. Like, seriously? Like, he was just saying, oh, I don't know anything about that. Like, really? I mean, all they have to do is get a hold of any of his records, albums. They put out these sermons. I mean, anyway, that's just stupid. So, anywho, that's kind of going on in that time frame. So, Tony does go into hiding. He was still running the church via the phone. He is in hiding because of this federal warrant. And while on the run, he was even recording tapes to be brought into the foundation to the members to listen to. And then the members, like the upper management members, were responsible for making sure all the other followers and members were listening to these tapes and making sure everybody obeyed. So he's still running things. He's not present physically, but he is still in charge. He's still running things. These higher up members, I don't get this at all, but it is truly unexplainable. So the members themselves have to sit through hours and hours of these taped sermons that Tony has put together, and they're awful. They're just, him being hateful and ranting and whatever. So none of it was very biblical. It was just kind of whatever personal rantings and rages that he had. And ex-members kind of talking about it later on would state he really sounded crazy, and he really sounded like he was on drugs or something. Like, he really sounded out of it in these taped sermons at this point, at least at this point in the later 80s. So, and Tony was kind of really losing it during this time. And there's still a lot of punishments going on. The families within the organization were getting separated. He was moving people around a lot. I guess he would send people at random, to California or here and there. The beatings were ramping up like they had been. One of the child members, who was actually 13 years old at the time, allegedly at this time, and then she was talking later, and that was Rebecca. So she stated that Tony, I guess she had not really called Tony a liar, but he had stated he told her something. She's like, well, he didn't tell me that. So he had her brought in. He had 4 grown-ups slap her across the face over and over again as hard as they possibly could. And then once they were finished with this, they were advised to do it all over again. And Rebecca, who was this child, she did suffer permanent hearing loss in her left ear. And she said the biggest thing that bothered her was so not only did she get beaten horrifically, but then she was removed from all the other children. So one of the things that she said growing up in the foundation was the kids stuck together. They were her entire life. They were her family. The kids only had each other. And so at this point, she is completely separated from all the other children. So this she said was the hardest thing for her. Because normally, no matter how bad it was there, she had them. So it was just, that was the biggest thing for her. So by April of 1990, Tony has been in hiding now for 2 years. And his civil case comes to trial. So this is the civil case that Carrie and Bob, his name is Robert, the Millers had put against Tony. So Tony still doesn't show up. And in his absence, Alamo was kind of found liable. He was found liable for defrauding, emotionally tormenting, and physically abusing the Miller children. So all these children named in this lawsuit. So the damages awarded was $1.8 million. And because it's a civil judgment, property can't be seized. And so a message went out to the members, I guess Tony and then the upper members, kind of forewarned the foundation that the FBI were about to raid the Georgia Ridge property, which is the Dyer property. It's the property near Alma. It's the one with the heart-shaped pool. So the FBI is coming in, and they all needed to get out. So February 13th, 1991, this is almost a year later, the U.S. Marshals, and then Carrie shows up, and the attorneys, and the FBI is involved. So they all go out to execute the order to seize the property. So they're seizing the Arkansas compound. The Arkansas State Police and the Sheriff's Department were also on hand to protect everyone because they really didn't know what they were going to find. So, and Tony was actually not on the compound. Like, he's still in hiding, but members, they said, just started literally running from the compound. They had bags of clothes. They would just run as soon as they saw the police, because this whole time they're being told the government, the police are just bad, bad, bad. This is ingrained in the followers, like that they should not talk to anyone, and that these people are just bad. So they're running away. Some of the followers had called like outside family members. So they're just abandoning the property. And the U.S. Marshal, like, they didn't intend to even touch Susan's mausoleum, because Susan's, she is buried on the Arkansas compound. But Tony, being insane as he is, so he had his men break into Susan's tomb, remove her coffin, and literally take her coffin on the road, like drove it off the property, and the coffin and Susan's body basically went into hiding. Yes. So, and additionally, like the police at this point, they were concerned. This is 1991. They, you kind of had the David Koresh stuff, or was that 94? I'll have to look at the dates on that. But they were very concerned about the whole, like, what they would find at the compound. Like, would there be people there with guns? Like, were they going to go quietly? Like, they didn't know. That's why so many showed up. So in 1992, Chris would file a lawsuit accusing Tony of taking Susan's body. And Tony would state kind of in one thing to the press, he was like, well, I didn't do it. And then he would tell the press at a later time, oh yeah, I have the body. So yeah. So it was just, he didn't even know what he was doing. So the members, again, they're on exodus. They ran out of the property after the raid, and Tony's businesses, of course, are crumbling. He's not there. The followers aren't there. They don't have the compound anymore. All of his Alma businesses would have completely suffered. So all the church properties in Alma were taken as well. So anything that the government could tie to Tony's foundation, like whether it was put in followers' name or whatever, if they could tie connections to it, they seized it. So in the same time, the IRS also seized, Tony had like a Lower Broadway Western clothing store. And so they auctioned it and seized really all communal properties and businesses across the country. So, cause he had this store in New York. He had all kinds of places. He had ministries in Nashville, New York, I believe in Oklahoma. Like, he had just a lot going on, Chicago. And so across the nation, all of these places are getting taken by the IRS. So Kerry interviewed later on, he said that he never received the full judgment. The IRS really took a lot of it for the back taxes, I guess. And of course there was attorney fees and then Kerry's part. So he said Kerry mentioned that he only maybe saw $7,000 of the damages, and that was of the 1.8 that was awarded. Now he said the biggest thing for him is just wanting justice against Tony, and he really just wanted there to be so much, I guess, money taken that it could stop the cult. That was really the goal, to stop the cult's activities and stopping Tony's actions. So at this point, there's definitely a dent being put in the operations. But 1 week after the raid, Tony did call a local journalist to kind of rage against the judge who had ordered the seizure of his property. He kind of said that he told this journalist that he would himself try the judge, find him guilty, then hang him until he died. So this is what he's saying he would do to the judge. And so he's putting this into record. He's verbally threatened this U.S. district judge. The article ends up making the front page news. And of course, the FBI shows up to the journalist door, as soon as this happened. So this threat happened in 1991 against Judge Arnold. Again, he's a U.S. District federal judge here in Arkansas. So this act of Tony's put him on the FBI's wanted list. And of course, so now the FBI and the U.S. Marshals are fully after him, because he's been on the run and he wasn't at the compound, but now there is a full-fledged manhunt, and they form an actual task force to find Tony because of this action. So they decided to launch a national television campaign to locate Tony. Carrie helped them as well. So Carrie was out there speaking. Chris was speaking to every reporter she could. So all of these ex-members are, doing everything that they can. So Tony continues to talk to the press, though. He calls some reporters. Because of the raid on the compound, the U.S. Marshals and the FBI had a detailed list of personal information on all the members of the cult. I mean, they had everybody, because they were able to go into the compound's office. And so they began monitoring all the phone calls between all these people. So they knew that somebody somewhere would be talking to Tony at some point. So all the members were kind of keeping silent as far as their communication. They weren't communicating to the authorities straight out, but of course they're communicating amongst each other, and their phones are being watched. So they do end up trailing to a phone number in Tampa, Florida, and they track the number down to where they can kind of see within this 3-tower area. It's like kind of a triangular area, and they kind of narrow down the physical space that this phone number is operating out of. And then one day they've got all these houses, they're watching the houses, they're watching the people coming and going, and they find a house and they're surveilling it, and a man emerges from the house to get the newspaper, and he looks exactly like Tony. So they positively ID him, and then on July 5th of 1991, they raid the house and they find Tony just sitting at the table there in the house by himself, eating breakfast. He had a huge amount of cash sitting there with him on the table. He had been using a fake ID, and he was posing as a man named Harry Cochran. So Tony did ask how they found him, and the team says this. They say divine intervention, and that the Lord led them there. So I thought that was funny. Susan's body was not there in Tampa. They did not find Susan's body. Tony even denies having or knowing where her body was, really. So Tony is taken back to Arkansas, and he goes on trial for the threat of kidnapping, interstate flight, and this was all related to his threat on Judge Morris Arnold. Now, I will say this, and this was super frustrating. The jury ends up acquitting him on these charges. The juror said afterwards that they didn't want to infringe on his right to free religion and speech. I know these days things are very different. This was, early 90s. I know that things are very different now, and I don't think that would fly now. I mean, not to say anyway, I just think it's very different when you're talking about threatening a federal judge's life to kill him and hang him and whatever. Anyway, so, however, even though Tony was acquitted on that charge, Tony is facing more charges, but he did get out of jail on bond, which was really, and this was related to the child abuse case in California. So they're kind of looking at this case first. And the California judge did give him bond or bail, like allowed him to bail out. So he does bail out. So he is out of jail. So he is released. He basically orders his members to regroup in Fort Smith. And there he has them purchase a building and set up a new church there. After the new church, Tony actually documents himself in the church, like he is holding a foot washing ceremony, and he's showing himself washing the feet of all the members, basically apologizing kind of for all of this situation. And he did tell them that he's being prosecuted for being a Christian. So now Tony's kind of newest message is strictly pushing more end times. He's saying this is the end times, really apocalyptic in nature now as far as his teachings to the church. And because of their raid and such and the Exodus, they're really an end time. So it's kind of, to him, he is making it align with this part of the Bible's teaching. So he's again using the Bible for his own personal interest, like always, and just still trying to control and manage all these people. And it's still working. It's still working. So a child member who grew up in the foundation and who was raised actually by Tony and Susan, his name was Benji. And so he was interviewed and he stated that during his time, he was actually put in control of the church office and making sure no one came in and out. And he had always been told by Tony and Susan that his mother was dead, like his mother wasn't living, that she was a sinner, and that they kind of saved him. Well, during this time that he had over the office, he actually found his birth certificate and he found the names of his parents, and he found out that they were very much alive and that none of that was true, that they had just been excommunicated from the church, and they just ended up, the Alamos ended up keeping Benji. So Benji was obviously extremely upset. He had grown up with these lies his whole life, and so he's upset. He wants to go find his real family, so he takes his birth certificate and $120 and he leaves. He runs away and he never goes back. So he gets out. He does state there's an interview, I think he went on a talk show. He does state that he grew up, and it was actually the Megyn Kelly show that he went on, and I'll reference this YouTube interview and such, but he does state that as an adopted son, he was treated well. Like he wasn't beaten. He wasn't done like the other children. He knew about what was going on. He knew about the awfulness, but he was not part of that. He was actually treated well, which is very interesting. Other than being lied to his entire life and manipulated and such, he wasn't beaten. In the summer of 1993, because of the need to prioritize the cases, so this is the government against Tony, so they were looking at the actual strongest case against Tony because they want to nail him with something. Right now he's out on bail. They know that he's doing bad things. They know all the bad things he's done. So they go ahead, they kind of put on the back burner the child abuse case in California, and they go on to the strongest case, which was in Memphis, actually. It's a federal case, the IRS case against him for tax evasion and fraud. So June 8th of 1994, he is convicted and sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. So they finally have him on something. He is finally going to prison. Kind of a little side note. So Tony, like we mentioned before, had been grooming his members for the fact that he, planned and would marry multiple girls, young girls. He was also telling members that a girl, again, became a woman, as soon as she started menstruation. So he did start to take on some of these young girls to kind of work in his office. Yes, so kind of work for him, which his office was in his home. So that was going on even right before he was, sentenced to this 6 years. And he had already been talking about polygamy in his sermons even before his divorce to Brigida. Now, I did find a couple of marriage licenses actually between 1984 and then 1986. And there were several in Tony's names and different names linked to Tony. And so it's hard to know exactly how many wives he married, but of course he couldn't legally marry most of them. So we'll kind of get into that. But there were some actual marriage licenses I did find other than the license to Brigida. So that was interesting. And one of them was an Elizabeth, and I think we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, luckily for all of these girls involved, he does go to prison. So at least for now, he is imprisoned, at least in 1990, starting in 1994. So he's off. He's sent to federal prison. It says he's sent off to a prison in Colorado at first. He does end up landing in Texarkana in a federal prison. So they kind of move him around. He did continue to run the cult. The cult is still going on from prison. His power, in fact, had grown a little bit. Obviously, it depleted because of the whole compound raid and all of that. But his outreach is building during this time, and he was relying heavily on his members who were, still being manipulated and such and going along with all this. And of course, he's in prison. He's being persecuted. And in his sermons, he is comparing himself to the disciples of Jesus, which is so gross in so many levels. But, because he is being persecuted, blah, 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 and in prison. So while in prison, his followers are still continuing to generate income. They're still giving to the ministry. So he's still very much in charge. He's, it's still going on. As crazy and as weird as I can't wrap my head around this. I can't understand this. But anywho, so Alamo orders his followers to now purchase property in Fouke. He chose Fouke because it's close to the prison where he was at, and it's an extremely small town. I think it only has like 800 people or so as far as citizens, especially at that time. Fouke is quite famous here due to the Fouke Monster and the Fouke Monster Mart. So we do have an episode on that, so go listen to that. But he is getting his followers in Fouke. So Alamo does also tell his followers, anyone who has children, to go ahead and move to Arkansas, because he still has, he has a reach. He has his tentacles out because these followers, family, and everybody. So he's had a larger reach than just his compound people, his compound followers, because he has had his sermons taped. And so his sermons and his teachings are going out to people all over. So he's saying, anyone with kids, go ahead and move to Arkansas. Let's, go ahead and give up your lives wherever you are and move to Arkansas. So, yes. So Tony is even recruiting. He had been recruiting before he got in prison and from prison. So he had recruited the young girls to work in his office, which was inside his home. And then some of the members were thinking that Tony was making these young girls his wife. And again, they don't really know. And now he's in prison. So I'm thinking the members aren't really too concerned about this because he's in prison or whatever. And then other followers are like, sure, you can have my daughter. You're a prophet. They're all about him taking their daughter on to work in his house and work for him as a prophet to God. So some of them are super on board with this. When we're talking very young girls, very young teenage girls, and we'll get into even younger situations. So he purchased a home, and then they built onto this home. So they kind of made it very catacombish. There was a lot of, it was broken down. It had little hallways. It was a lot going on in this home. And he would he wouldn't, but he would have his followers build onto this. And so evidently there were small bedrooms for multiple wives to sleep in. So there was just kind of like this compound home situation in Fouke. And the wives would also, evidently he's got wives, multiple, and they would be visiting him in jail. They would come in groups, and they were keeping him knowledgeable on everything going on while he was gone. And it would also, they were told to bring him pictures of children in the church. He stated he just wanted to make sure that they were healthy and happy, but really people felt later on that he was looking at these pictures and looking for potential wives, because there were a few girls that were pulled after seeing these pictures. They were pulled to come work in his house and add them to his house. We're talking, very young girls, 8, 10, whatever. And so he was kind of perusing these pictures and to get more, girls, more so-called wives. So in 1998, the federal prison was looking to release Tony. However, so I guess after serving 4 years, however, Susan's body was still like on the road, but her body was part of the agreement. So, and she's been missing. In fact, her body's been missing since 1991. So her body has been gone for 7 years. Nobody, quote unquote, knows where it is. So the judge told Tony if he didn't release Susan's body the day that he came out of prison, that they would immediately pick him up and put him in a holding jail in Fort Smith until Susan's body's returned. So because he is Susan's husband, he did get to pick the place to bury her. But Chris, part of the agreement was she got to know where Susan was. And so Susan's body did show up anonymously. It just showed up one day to a funeral home overnight. And so she was interred finally in a mausoleum. It's called Memorial Park Cemetery in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So she has been there since 98. So Tony is out of prison. He's out now. And he knows that they're still watching him. He's still under scrutiny. However, so as soon as he's out and about, he does have the young girls in his house. And now the young girls are in a real nightmare. He's been in jail, but now he's out. And of course, these young girls are, he would get these young girls and he would so-called have a little private ceremony and he would exchange rings with them, and then he would require these girls to consummate the marriage. And of course, they're terrified, they're hurting, they're scared of what's going to happen. One of these girls is literally 8 years old, and she would go on later to testify against Tony. He ended up acquiring 24 so-called wives, and 9 were underage. And Chris, Susan's daughter, states that she 100% believed these girls later on when they came out, because she herself stated that she was sexually assaulted by Tony when she was younger, and she went to her mother to tell her, and her mother did not believe her and called her a liar. So Tony's underage girls are just begging to be turned out of the house. They want to go home. They want to go back to their parents. They want to get away from him. Some of their own parents, did not even live in Arkansas, but were followers from elsewhere. So the adults that had left the cult kind of knew about what was going on. And of course, they're feeling extreme shame and guilt and whatever. But some of them start to go to the authorities. And the problem that the authorities were having when these people are finally coming forward with these stories about Tony and the underage stuff and the abuse, like kind of it's so far in the past that there's time limits. Like back then there were time limits even on like the statutory rape. And I could be very wrong. I don't think that is in place now, but back in this time there was. So the police are kind of having people come forward, but their hands are tied legally on some of these issues. So in September, so now we're rolling up to September 2005. So this goes on for almost 10 years that he's out of prison. So in September 2005, former members, they do come together and they go on this FactNet, which was, and they start having these internet discussion forums. And they do start to discuss and expose the abuses going on in the Alamo group. So the FBI, of course, is watching. They're listening, they're watching, and they're knowing what's going on, and they're trying to figure out how to legally process this. So in February 2006, this was interesting. The city of Fouke actually presents a certificate of appreciation to Alamo and his ministry for their acts of Christian love and kindness in helping those in need. So this is disturbing because, of course, I get, the city of Fouke, they don't know, evidently what's going on. They don't have any clue how awful a nightmare this man is in this situation. Although I would say if they could go back and look at public record, they would know for sure. But they don't know. So anyway, so they're giving this certificate of appreciation. However, and we'll see a little bit later on, by April 2006, there is, called Alamo Ministries Watch.com. It's a watchdog internet site, which is also exposing the evils of Tony Alamo, and they're becoming available on the internet. So Tony's attorney finds out about it and uses intimidation and threats to have the site removed by the following year. So by 2007, they pulled that one down. By August 2006, like 6 months after giving Tony that appreciation certification, the Fouke locals kind of feel less kindly on Alamo because he has posted armed guards along a city street where the Alamo compound was located. So the people of Fouke are starting to realize this is not good. And they're probably starting to look into him more. And maybe talk to other people and But anyway, around this time, many of the Fouke citizens, informed about Alamo's crimes against children, they organized a group called PACA, Partners Against Cult Activity, in an effort to inform the community and local authorities of the true nature of the group. So bravo to you, Fouke. The FBI, of course, is still watching. They're waiting. And what the FBI really needs is a current wife to come forward. That's what they're really needing because, again, everything that they know or all the witnesses at this point, it's just too far in the past. So meanwhile, the wives are being assaulted, beaten, abused, sexually in every way. He would be still recording his sermons, and he would literally stop in mid-sermon to berate and belittle the wives. Like, you could hear it on the tape, and I heard it. So if the wives displeased Tony in any way, they would be removed from his home, which actually sounds like a really good thing. But they would be placed in what was called a home of scorn, which was just really kind of putting them in kind of a little prison. They were hardly ever out anyway, but basically this house was like a little greenhouse. They were demoted to there. They had to be alone. And he really kept the wives secluded. Like, he really didn't want anyone to know what was going on. He didn't want anyone to know how many wives, the ages. Like, the wives were not going in and out. I mean, they never got to leave the houses or rooms hardly ever that they were in. So, yeah. So even to other members, he was really trying to keep this quiet. And he did have, like, this Fouke compound. He had cameras everywhere. He was monitoring if anyone were to break in and out. Like, these people were not free to do what they wanted. Finally, in 2006, a wife named Amy, who was now 22, but had been underage, she asked to leave and asked for a bus ticket out. So she actually leaves. For some reason, they let her, she gets out. Luckily for her, she gets out. Another wife named Desiree, and she was the one that was 8 years old. So she is now 15, and she escapes. Like, she literally leaves in the dark of the night around 11:30 at night. She dodges the cameras and the guards. And on November 30th of 2006, like, she has a relative pick her up, and she is gone. So she's literally 15, and she went in at 8. She became his wife at 8. It's disgusting. And at first, like, when Amy first came out, the authorities knew about her. They were told about her by ex people, but she wouldn't talk at first. She was scared. I mean, these people obviously are very programmed, and they're very scared. They're scared of Tony. They're scared of all the scary things that he's told them. They're going straight to hell, and everything that he's probably threatened them with and their families with. So Amy at first doesn't talk. So Desiree was actually one of the first, to talk to authorities. She does identify the wives, so she's giving names and stuff. She's giving names of others that had left, that had, gotten away even, and that were there. So she does relay to the FBI that Alamo was actually taking pictures of the underage girls when they were naked. And so for the FBI, this was a breakthrough for them because child pornography fell under federal jurisdiction. Now, one of the other wives, who was 11 at the time that she was a so-called wife, and now she's out. I believe her name was Summer. So she tells how she took a trip with Tony. He took her on a trip. He assaulted her, and she went across state lines. And so the FBI, knowing about this, now has significant charges to place on Tony. So they go in again to raid. So they're going to raid the compound now in Falk and execute their search warrant for the pornography that they really hope to find. So the FBI, at this point, they're really concerned about the Waco thing had happened in 94, and they didn't really know. They're going into this compound. They know that there have been armed guards. They are pretty scared about what could potentially happen, and they definitely do not want another Waco situation on their hands. So they're very leery of how they go in. But it is like the FBI, it's all authorities on hand to go in. SWAT teams, yes. So in February, so they do go in, yeah. So in February 2007, so this was just a little tidbit, Tempur-Pedic International brings a lawsuit in federal court against several individuals that are longtime Alamo members. One of them was Tommy Scarcello for stealing 8,000 mattresses that were supposed to be donated to Hurricane Katrina victims. Ugh. So Alamo's wives, Sharon Krupp and Elizabeth Mercado. So Elizabeth was one of those marriage license I'd seen. Both are implicated because the mattresses are stored in warehouses in their name. So again, Tony's either putting things in the foundation's name, but he's also, a lot of items are being held in individual followers' names. Nothing is ever in Tony's name. In October of 2007, another watchdog internet site debuts exposing Alamo. Since they had to take that other one down, now this one, it's TonyAlamoNews.com. And I believe that one I found again. So additionally, so they hadn't gone into the compound yet, but they were getting ready to. So additionally, in this, time frame, Alamo's assistant pastor, his name is Buster White. So he pleads innocent to federal charges of trafficking counterfeit merchandise. So in 2008, he actually pleads guilty, and he was fined $210,000 and sentenced to 60 to 90 days in jail. This was federal for trafficking counterfeit music CDs. So this is his assistant pastor. Because of an article about the cult called The Ravening Wolf by Susan Buchanan, the Southern Poverty Law Center added the Alamo Ministries to a list of hate groups. So the ministry is actually on a hate group as of that time frame as well. So finally, like I had mentioned before, the FBI, they were closing in on Alamo and Falk in the Falk compound for these situations with the wives, so-called wives. So it actually comes to play. So September 20th, 2008, federal and state authorities, they send the SWAT team in. The girls are hysterical. Alamo wasn't there. The girls are all removed from the house. They state it's a super large home. So they're really trying to take their time looking at every single thing because they're really looking for the actual child pornography. They do not find the pictures, but they do find the camera equipment and new film. Additionally, they do find boxes of Viagra and ovulation tests. In one bedroom, they found multiple sets of wedding rings. So, like, again, he had so-called 24 wives. DHS does pull all the children from any known property that was related to the ministries if they were underage. So it did say that the child welfare workers took 6 girls into custody between the ages of 10 and 17. Because of course you believing them to be in immediate danger. So they're doing everything they can with even related properties. In the meantime, the news outlets were running the stories on all the alleged crimes, all of it. So DHS felt like they had to move very fast because they were concerned Tony was trying to move kids out of the state. Because again, they still very much have this property in California. So the kids are taken, in by the state. The kids are put into foster care. And if the parents agree to raise the children outside the church, then they could have the possibility of getting their kids back. But literally, some of these adults, some of these followers did not take their kids back. Like, they chose to stay within the ministry. Like, I can't even. Anywho. Yeah. So Tony wasn't apprehended in the raid, so the FBI continues their pursuit of Tony because he's on the run. So there were rumors that Tony was in LA, like at the LA property, so they do try to go out there. He does still have members out there on the Saugus property. They go there, but they miss him. So he had been there and he had left. So Tony, in the meantime, is still talking to press because that's what he does. And so he's calling the news outlets and he's just ranting and raving. And the news outlets are pretty much calling him out and making him look stupid and crazy. Like, they're really, they're not on his side for sure. And he's just toying with the FBI by calling all these people and going to the news anyway. So he thought he was so smart and had a secret phone number that no one knew about, but they did track him. They were able to track him to a hotel, and they found him trying to leave the hotel. So they did apprehend him, and then they had only about 30 days to officially indict him, or they had to let him free. So they did work on these charges super quickly. Of course, it kind of hurts them that they do not find the pornography. Some of the wives are stated that basically he told them to purge things, like, clear things out because he was concerned about raids. So there was a lot of things that would have been incriminating that he would tell people to, like, get rid of anyway. So that was a hindrance, but because they didn't find that, they did still have the interstate transportation of minors. And they, of course, did have the girl's name that was the 11-year-old girl. Her name was Summer. So they had Summer, and they had Desiree. And so they did, and these are the known people at this point. So they do know about other brides, and so they're trying to now, Amy's coming forward, other people are coming forward to talk to them, and Amy finally agrees to help them, as well. And then in all, they're now able to get 5 ex-wives to testify, and Tony was indicted on 10 counts of interstate travel of a minor for sex. He was transferred to Arkansas to await his trial, and by the time of the trial, they now had 20 to 30 witnesses total. And people did discuss, about the wives for one thing, and then all the beatings. On the flip side of this, the defense did have some members who were parents of these girls that literally testified against these women and called them liars. They were just so programmed and controlled by Tony still, and that's unbelievable. But anyway, regardless of the defense that was put together, the prosecution was still super strong. And so Tony is sentenced. He is sentenced to 175 years total in prison. He would die in prison because they did stack his sentences. And so at this point, he has literally been leader of this cult, this foundation, for 4 decades, 40 years. In that 40 years, he faced 18 lawsuits. In 2012, his testimony was actually filmed for a civil trial regarding child abuse. So still, even though he's in prison, he's still facing a civil lawsuit. So they did ask, or I guess the jury, to set the penalties so high that they really just, in the civil suit, they wanted to eradicate the ministry, which is a criminal enterprise. This is very much a criminal enterprise. So it says that David Curtis' legal team won $1.1 billion for the children raped and beaten by Tony. So this was kind of a group civil suit that was filed. They are still seizing Alamo's assets to testify judgments to this day. So they were still looking to seize and pay. Tony was shuttled around to several different prisons over the years. A few of his followers maintain contact with him. They continue to run the ministry. I mean, there's still followers, namely a large faction in the Saugus, California still. There are some wives still living together. Tony did have glaucoma and diabetes, and he did die in prison in 2017, only serving 8 years of his 175. As of 2018, there was even recorded evidence that in New York City there was still a quote-unquote church gathering, and it looked like it was in a restaurant bar, and it was called the Tony Alamo Ministries, and they were recruiting, and they were having a church service. This was 2018 in New York City. You can literally Google Alamo Ministries in Arkansas now, and it reflects an active church in Fort Smith. There is also a very simple website titled Alamo Ministries, which I will reference. Again, super alarming. Can't even believe it. So, even if these followers are kind of wishing just to continue the good side of this ministry, it doesn't make sense that you would use this man's name who is connected with nothing good. I mean, absolutely nothing good. So that doesn't make sense to me. I don't know if these followers, I mean, obviously they're not in collusions with Tony. Tony is gone. So I don't know the purpose of using Tony Alamo's name for anything good. I don't comprehend that. So in light of all the cults in the country, kind of manipulating people for their money, possessions, time, assaulting them and their families, please get help. Please get help. I tell Elle all the time, please don't join a cult. I'm laughing because this is ridiculous, and you would think it doesn't happen, but it does happen. There are so many, and there's so many documentaries now coming out. The Nexus, the dance ones. I guess anytime someone wants to take all your money, 100% of your earnings, maybe that's not great. And then especially if they want you to stop talking to your family and friends that love you. Okay. So, not a great situation. I know these cults prey on people in just their worst times, and it's just sad. So if you know of anyone, I am going to link organizations that help people in cults. And definitely, if anything happened to any of my family, I'd be pounding the cult's door until, I just do everything in my power to get them out of there and get them deprogrammed, and the only way you can do that is by really getting them out, I guess. So anyway, yeah, if you know of anyone that is suffering this cult issue, just please, always get help. Do everything you can. So this was a lot, and for me, it was 100% unexplainable. I just can't explain these people. But who can? When you've got psychopaths running around like Tony Alamo. So take care of yourselves and your loved ones. This one was a lot. So yeah, but I love you guys, and I hope you have a good week or good rest of your week. You'll have another episode coming out Monday, and that will be the 21st. Yes. And then, so I'll be definitely putting out every Monday is when I'll release a new episode. And this week we'll have 2. So you just never know. And lots of interesting content coming. And of course the live show. So Anyway, love you guys. Have a great week. Bye. So they then decided to go to a spot. Okay.
Unexplained Arkansas.